My guest today is Erik Larson, who's the author of numerous books of nonfiction. I read that all the quotes in all of his books are actual historical quotes, which seems hard to believe because the stories seem hard to believe. I think he's best known for Devil in the White City. And I'd like to ask you to tell us a little bit about why you decided to write that particular story about the murderer.
Oh boy, it's a long story, and it certainly takes me back because that came out in 2003. What made me do that book? I had been looking for. I was looking for my next book idea. I finished writing Isaac Storm about a hurricane that destroyed the city of Galveston in 1900. I was looking for my next idea, and I had thought about doing a book about a murder. And I was actually looking for something worth writing about, a historical murder. Took out the Encyclopedia of Murder, which is the sausage being made. Yeah, I came across the guy who ultimately appears in this book, Holmes, or Mudgett, which is his real name. And I was not interested in writing about him, actually, because I didn't want to do crime porn, if you will. He was just so over the top bad. So I kept looking. I got sidetracked. I went off to do another book. But I came back to, actually, I got the timing. I got the chronology wrong there. I did go off to do a different book. But I came back then to this idea, and I started thinking, maybe this isn't going to work. I wanted to have a murder story, something along the lines of Gosford Park, the film, something with a lot of custom and manner and so forth. But then was not having any luck, decided just was really on the verge of giving it up when I remembered that in reading about the killer Holmes, I had read about the World's Fair of 1893. So I started thinking, well, maybe there's something in the World's Fair. So I started reading about that. And that's when I realized, wait a minute, that's what this book is about.
Yes.
It's the fact that the murder and the fair took place in the same place at the same time. And it's sort of a juxtaposition of good and evil and darkness and light. So that's how that came about.
How long does it take you to write one of these books with all the research?
Well, it varies a bit, but it tends to range from conception to final draft. That is the edited final draft. It's probably typically about 4 years, because on the front end, I spent a lot of time thinking about ideas and working on a book proposal. That's sometimes can take up to 6 months. But all that information, of course, is stuff I can use when I eventually get to working on the project. And then there's another probably about maybe 2.5 years of solid research. But before that research phase ends, I've typically already begun writing. I begin writing the things that I can write. So there's some overlap. But let's say 3 to 4 years typically.
How did you get into writing these kinds of nonfiction when you were trained as a journalist? I believe you went to Columbia.
Yeah. Well, it's actually even more complicated than that. I mean, I became a journalist because I wanted to write. I wanted to make my living as a writer. My intention early on when I started my journalism career was I wanted to write novels on the side. I'm pretty disciplined. I'm able to get up quite early and devote a few hours each day to things like that. I wanted to write actually a literate detective story. But I also wanted to make a living doing what I do. But journalism was great. I loved it. I got actually really into it and sort of distracted me from my novelistic career. Probably a good thing for readers everywhere. But over time, as my journalism career evolved, as I wrote longer and longer things, I suddenly realized one day that the amount of effort that I was putting into a really long news or magazine story, after I started at the Bucks County Courier-Times in Levittown, Pennsylvania, moved on to the Wall Street Journal, where I wrote longer and longer and better things. left the journal and started doing long magazine articles. And it was those that I realized, I'm putting so much effort into those that why not just write a book? So that's when I segged into my very first book, which was called The Naked Consumer, on a contemporary subject, which was about, how companies were spying on individual consumers. It'd be a good book to redo now, but I'm not gonna. Unfortunately, that book, when that book came out, nobody read it, nobody bought it. It just sank like a stone. But I had gotten the bug, and so I continued to do books.
The thing that brought Nixon down, Watergate, did that enter into it?
Well, see, that's what got me into journalism. That's what made me realize, okay, this is what I'll do to make money. I mean, other things that I had thought about doing that might feed a novelistic or at least literary career. I thought about becoming a New York City cop. I thought about becoming a lawyer, working for a DA's office. My first job out of college was with a publisher, and in that year, I watched the film All the President's Men. And after seeing that film, I was totally galvanized. I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I put my life in the hands of fate, and I applied to one journalism school. That was Columbia, and I got in, for better or worse, and proceeded from there.
Well, you went to Penn as an undergraduate.
Yes.
And I thought you were summa cum laude, so you were smart. What books did you write that you most enjoyed? I think I know the answer to this. I think it's In the Garden of the Beast. That's my guess.
Well, I have to tell you that I feel about my books the way I feel about my children. That I love them all equally. So I'm not going to say I like one any more than the other. They're all so distinct in terms of the challenges that they posed and the writing opportunities. In the Garden of the Beasts was for me, I would say, particularly satisfying is the wrong word, because actually ultimately the research, the writing of that book left me sort of feeling having a sort of a low-grade depression, because how awful all those people were, and how we all mean the West, America, anybody, all the onlookers, how we all let it happen.
Well, I should explain to listeners that this was about the American ambassador to Germany in 1933 when Hitler first came to power. And I've read the book, and I thought that he was very similar in personality to a Victorian academic, perhaps like Wilson.
Yes.
And he seemed to be very accepting of what was going on in Germany. He was in the middle of Berlin in the Garden of the Beasts, which was Hitler.
Yes, he was very accepting. And yes, it's about America's first ambassador to Nazi Germany, but what really drew me to that story was his daughter. What I set out to do was to try to get a sense of what would it have been like if I had been living in Nazi Germany in 1933-34 during Hitler's rise. How would I as like a typical onlooker, how would I have perceived it? Would I have been, horrified? Would I have been thrilled? Would it have been just the most ho-hum thing if I'd been there in Berlin? And so I set out trying to find characters through whose eyes I could look at that period. We could look at that period. I went through a number of characters until I settled on Dodd, and the only reason I settled on Dodd was because of his daughter. Dodd alone, as an ambassador, I find diplomatic histories can be very tedious.
Yes.
But when you throw in a daughter like Martha Dodd, it was great. Very, very interesting, very exciting. And they were the perfect foil, if I may say, for looking at the rise of Hitler in 33, 34, because Dodd, as you say, he approached it with from a very objective view, sort of the objective view that journalists always try to maintain. For example, even now, where objectivity, frankly, may not be the thing that is best for us all. But he took a very objective view of things, and his daughter, on the other hand, was really in love with Nazism, at least initially. She loved the enthusiasm She was sleeping with the first chief of the Gestapo, the first chief of the Gestapo, Rudolf Diels. The two perspectives were exactly the kind of thing I was trying to get at. And what the real miracle of those two characters, and I say characters because they were, of course, real flesh and blood people, but it's just the best way to describe the subjects of a book. But the really amazing thing from my perspective as a writer of nonfiction is that both actually had clear narrative arcs in which they were transformed by the events at hand. The events at hand, the main seminal event in the book being the Night of the Long Knives, when Hitler purged his longtime ally Ernst Röhm and consolidated his hold over the country. I liked the even though I did feel sort of in the end kind of depressed about the whole thing. I liked the slowly gathering darkness. It was like a Gothic horror story really at root. So yeah, that's how that came about, and that's how I got it started.
Let me ask you about you are out here in the Hamptons. Is that where you spent the pandemic?
At the moment, I'm in the city, but yes, we have a presence in the Hamptons, Southampton.
What drew you to our neck of the woods here?
Oh boy, it's a relatively easy answer. My sister has had a place in Southampton for over 30 years. And so we knew it pretty well from Thanksgivings and visits and so forth. And so one day, this is the kind of thing that, should always learn, live and learn. My wife and I, was in February of all things. We were on the weekend off. And so we came out to Southampton to stay at an inn. And, before we did that, we said, why don't we just take a look at some houses, just see what the real estate landscape is like.
Entertainment.
The first house we saw, we thought, we could do this. And so we made an offer that got turned down because another offer had come through. But then that offer fell through and we got the house, for better or worse. So now we live around the corner from my sister. So that's what kind of drew us to our neighborhood.
What do you like to do when you're out here besides write in the morning?
I write. I like to sit out back on the deck with a cup of coffee. Love to watch the birds at the bird feeder, the hummingbirds when we have them. But I especially love going to the beach. I'll drive down typically to Dune Beach. That's my favorite beach. And just
Which one?
Dune Beach, way at the end there. Still a village beach before you get to the town beach at the west end.
Oh, I see. And what are you working on right now?
I am working on my next book, my next nonfiction book. I've committed to it, signed a deal, but I'm not going to talk about it. I never talk about books at this early days because I can't afford to have somebody look at me and say, "What? You're doing that?" But more excitingly, though, is I have this audio-only ghost story, my first foray into fiction, which is coming out on September 28th. And it's fiction, it's a ghost story, but it's based on all kinds of real life nonfiction weird things that I discovered in the course of my research for my book Thunderstruck. And I just felt that I had to get these things into something, and why not write a ghost story of the kind that I really like for some Halloween. Now, it took a lot longer than I thought. It's been 10 years in the making or more, but now it's coming to fruition mainly because this new thing in publishing, the audio original. So
why do it only on audio? Why not make a book?
Because a couple of reasons. I'm a nonfiction writer. This is my thing. And, people sometimes get confused enough about my books, thinking, oh, that's got to be fiction, or people will often call them novels, although I think that's partly because a lot of people don't really realize that a novel is purely fiction. But frankly, I didn't want to blur my brand, if you will. I didn't want people seeing a book of fiction of mine next to my nonfiction books and think, wait, what's going on? And so audio original was the ideal way to flex these muscles and have some fun, and not have it become sort of this weird this weird artifact on the shelf next to all my other nonfiction books. It was a perfect resolution to that concern that I had.
Do you isolate yourself in the house or outside when you write? That's what a lot of, Bob Caro has his own little shed, by the
Yeah,
way.
actually, I've seen a photograph of his own little shed. I don't have a shed. When I'm out in Southampton, I work actually from our principal bedroom, which works very well up on the second floor. It's very I easily sequester myself there. And I do typically write from the early morning till around noon or so. When I'm in New York, I write in I have an office, a dedicated office, and that's where I'll hold up.
I want to thank you for all the books that you've done
Thank you.
that I've enjoyed. Isaac Storm, it seems to be worse than any we have had, except maybe Sandy.
Yeah, well, with climate change, just wait for it.
And it just kind of destroyed the city. And it had been as I recall reading it, it had been the rival to Houston, I think, as the port.
Yes. Galveston had been a rival to Houston. This big storm essentially eclipsed Galveston as any kind of rival.
Yeah, that's what happened. So thank you for coming and spending a little time on the podcast.
Thank you, Dan.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. I've been familiar with Dan's papers ever since my sister bought her place, I think.
How long ago was that?
Yeah, that was probably 30 years. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So,
it does. Thanks for coming. This is Erik Larson, and we'll be posting this, I guess, sometime around right around the movie weekend.
okay.
So we'll see you there.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks. Cheers. Glad this came off. Bye.